All right, my meeting's already over. I'm sorry, I can't answer that.
I'd like to start the Streets and Transportation Committee meeting on 10 November at 8:29 p.m. Present are committee members Glassburn, Kelly, and Limpert. Council members Broussard, Schuman, Williamson, Heeman, and Council President Jones, which makes all of council. The law director, the finance director, the HR director, the planning director, and is the mayor still on? Mayor is on as well. Okay. And guests. Oh, city engineer is going to take part as well. Okay. On the agenda is two pieces of legislation, Resolution 2020-111 and also 2020-120. So I'm going to go a little out of order here, and let's start with 2020-120, which is the Elm Road Grant. A resolution authorized Director of Planning and Community Development to make applications on behalf of the City of North Olmsted for Community Development Block Grant funds for the fiscal year 2021 for the Elm Road Rehabilitation Project. Further authorizing the mayor to accept grant funds if awarded and to execute contract with Cuyahoga County if required and declare an emergency. Mrs. Lieber, are you going to take this?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. Each year we go through a process to determine what projects might be eligible to apply for Community Development Block Grant funds. This is flow-through funds through Cuyahoga County. It's the Competitive Municipal Grant Program. The city is eligible to apply for up to $150,000. There's no required match. We've used this program successfully in the past for many senior center improvements, the walking path recently, Burns Road sidewalks, and Kennedy Ridge Road resurfacing are some examples. The administration recommends applying for resurfacing of Elm Road. Elm is one of the streets in our last street rating that rated a score of 5 out of 10, which is amongst the lowest in the city. So I think we might have one street, Rainbow, that is currently less than a 5. It's also located within a low moderate income block group and also an improvement target area. So it checks both boxes in terms of what the county will be looking for in terms of eligibility. So, next year, 2021, is a bit of an uncertain budget year. We haven't completed our budget process yet, but we'd like to take a conservative approach, and we thought that you can't go wrong with streets, bricks and mortar projects and infrastructure, and we're recommending to pursue this street project. And we would use our the funds that would be designated for our annual streets program for the additional cost above the 150. So Elm is just over 4,000 linear feet. It has about 80 homes on it, give or take, and we estimate that the entire project, engineering and construction, would be around $300,000. So it's probably, aside from Brook Park, one of the more costly streets in our streets program for next year. So we thought that this was a great way of deferring the cost to the city, investing in the community, and will hopefully be a competitive grant project. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I think you are not off mute, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I was not. I just wanted to make a comment. I think it's great that we're targeting one of our worst rated streets for this grant. I think it makes them more competitive, and then it's also nice to really focus on the streets that need it most. Any questions from committee? Questions from council? Okay. At this time, I'd like to make a motion to approve Resolution 2020-120 and ask for a second.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
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 Motion passes 3-0. Next on the agenda is Resolution 2020-111, which is a meeting. We've had a couple meetings in here. It was held in committee last time. This is related to the Clegg Road project. It's a resolution authorizing the Director of Planning and Community Development to make an application to the ODOT on behalf of the City of North Olmsted for funding for safety-related improvements to Clegg Road, and further authorizing funds for the required local match, and further authorize the mayor to accept a grant if awarded and execute a contract the same. So since this was held in committee, there was some follow-on emails from the planning director that I thought would be beneficial to go over in committee to get any other follow-on questions answered, as well as just seek out if there was any proposed amendments for this piece of legislation. So Mrs. Lieber, I'm going to share something from the email you sent just so we can kind of clarify on the cost estimates, because that was what I think some of the general questions were around, was better understanding the cost of this. Mr. Mazzarella, can you pass me the sharing privileges? It's not allowing me to share. Let me see.
You should
There
have
we go.
now.
Now I can. Thank you. So Ms. Lieber, this just came from your email you sent. I forwarded that on to committee. These are the planning assumptions of costs. So I'm getting a lot of other things showing here. Let me, can you see my full screen, or are you seeing the, are you seeing my Word document?
Yes.
Get your Word document.
Okay. So, Kim, can you just talk us through here about, this was basically NOACA, from your email, NOACA assuming $500,000 per mile to mill and fill. Can you just kind of talk through us from this part?
Sure. I had asked our city engineer to help me derive an estimate for what the resurfacing alone would cost, so we could compare it to the potential addition of the full third lane. And so he provided that information that you've cut and paste on your screen. So he shared how NOACA will typically plan for streets projects. And he said, you know, typically they'll budget around $500,000 per mile to mill and fill. And that's the approach that's taken for these resurfacing projects. And then there's a percentage that will be added on top, and that goes to the design engineering and inflation, and I imagine construction engineering as well. A thing to point out with most of the state and federal funding that we've received in the past is that it really is the surface course only that you get funding for. Base repairs have, I'm trying to think of a case where it hasn't fallen on the city. There might be, but at least recently with 252 resurfacing, the city had to pay for 100% of the base repair. And for Brook Park Road, we had discussed in that committee meeting how our estimate increased due to the amount of base repair required. So you take, you know, the mill and fill estimate plus these additional percentages to come up with a general idea of what, you know, the project might cost. So the Clegg Road expanse from Lorain North to the city limit is about a mile. And so when you apply the $500,000 and the percentages, you get to about $765,000. And we also then, our city engineer had provided some comparables just to show, like when we did Columbia Road, what the estimate was and then what the actual. So in that case, you know, the estimate was a bit higher, and the bids came in well. So sometimes it depends on the bidding season, the time of year you're bidding, how competitive it is. So you always like to think that you'll come in under the estimate, but you kind of never know. But I guess I would feel comfortable saying, you know, that a resurfacing project, including base repair and engineering, would be in the $750,000 range for that stretch. And again, that does not include any of the safety improvements at all. So, but I guess if we're trying to compare, you know, what a resurfacing project would look like versus what an expansion and widening project would look like, then you're kind of comparing, you know, you kind of get a better comparison in this case. So kind of the $6 million estimate for the full 3-lane expansion versus the under $1 million for the resurfacing.
And Kim, would you expect is there any county participation out of this 765, or does that traditionally happen, or would that be all our cost?
The county is absolutely participating. So NOACA has granted us an award of $475,000, and Cuyahoga County has agreed to split the remainder of construction with the city 50-50. And they're also going to be covering 60% of our design engineering cost. And if we do apply and are awarded the safety grant, they said, the city would be responsible for 10%. They will share our 10% of that as well. So yeah, so of the 765, the city responsibility will be quite a bit less than that number. So once we take out the 475 and then split 50-50, the remainder of construction, that number starts to come down dramatically.
Okay. And then just some other comments that you had. You'd reached out to the County of Public Works and relating to how they would review, an alternative plan. And I believe what they said was that they would essentially follow whatever ODOT recommends, right? Either positive or negative.
Right. When I spoke to Nicole English, she had said that they'll typically follow suit. They'll, take the ODOT's lead when it comes to recommendations on what's appropriate or not appropriate in terms of projects and improvements. So, if the city was interested in going the route of the full expansion, the third lane and the larger project, she said that's just not something that they could easily add money to. Like that would pretty much be like starting over and having a discussion, kind of from square one, because they're going to be in it for the 50% of our share of the resurfacing, not 50% of a, multi-million-dollar project. So it would likely cause delay, but I don't know that there's any assurance that they would participate at that level if we were to go in that direction.
Okay. And then I think the other comment was around reaching out to ODOT and what their expectations were funding for the typical allocation, not this safety specific grant. And I believe the Mount McDonald mentioned that in the last meeting as far as being fuzzy, but did you mention how is their funding based off, or what's their revenue source typically that they base their road support funding off of?
So a contact at NOACA mentioned that they use gas tax revenues to fund safety projects, and that they've seen a steep decline in those revenues as people were staying home and not traveling. And I think that's a big question in terms of like the fuzzy future and the unknown is, if and when those revenues will be replenished, and then, if traveling behaviors go back to normal, will they go back to funding at the same level, or will they be more conservative? One observation made was the ODOT's really going to be looking more carefully at every application. The safety committee will, be looking more critically at the safety benefit of what's proposed, just because of the more limited resources that they'll have in the near-term future here moving forward with the safety program.
Okay. Thanks for those updates. Anything else you need to add, or otherwise I'll open up to the rest of the committee.
Nothing further. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Any questions from committee? Mr. Glassburn.
So, Mr. Chair, I may have misunderstood what you said. I saw part of one of the emails forwarded from you, but the top half of what you shared with us tonight I hadn't seen previously. Is that something you could send around and share?
Certainly, yeah, I can certainly share that. That may have came in the day after I sent the initial correspondence. So, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I guess what I'm still, we're speaking for myself, where I'm still at is, it is obvious that if we had a specific project then we went and said we were doing a completely different project, that the whole thing would have to be reevaluated by ODOT or the county or NOACA or any other participating entities. That is not, that should not come as a surprise to anybody. Nor that if the project changed in scope, that the percentages would change in scope. What the core questions to me are, would the absolute amount of money still be there in terms of how much we're getting, since we are still resolving the problems? Secondly, I would like to see this presented. You know, we've seen a presentation on one option that's fairly thorough. We did not get the same level of treatment to the other two options that were researched. And so we're kind of pecking at it from different directions to try to piece together the idea of what those two other options are, but we don't have that full picture. So that's what I'm still looking for, Mr. Chair. Again, I come back to this is not a simple repaving of a side street. This is a major artery of our town. And if we go forward with this, we are setting the policy of this major artery for the next couple decades. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So, Ms. Lieber, in order to get that, we would have to add additional scope to the estimates of study, correct? I believe we got essentially what that number looks like in previous meetings, but can you just elaborate?
Right. So the consultant has, fulfilled their scope where they evaluated 3 alternatives. But I believe once the data showed a preferred alternative, the greater effort then for the remainder of the report was spent on those specific recommendations and why they're being recommended and why others were not. So to fully flesh out alternatives that were not recommended did not seem like a valuable use, I think, of consultant time if the data was saying that there could be safety hazards created or limited benefit. So I guess that would be my response, that if council wanted to fully flesh out the non-recommended alternatives, I would probably suggest that was a little beyond what we would normally expect a consultant to do. I'm sure anything can be done with additional funds, or I could ask if they'd be willing to do that, but I guess I'm unsure of the additional benefit of doing that.
Thank you. Any other? Go ahead, Mr. Glassburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So unless I have the chronology wrong, and if I do, please correct me. The study was done, then we did the community response survey. Is that correct, Mr. Chair?
Mr. Chair, you're on mute.
Still on mute.
I think he's asking me to answer.
Yeah, go ahead, Mrs. Lieber. Yeah.
My lip reading skills. The public input, well, we needed to gather a certain amount of data because we wanted to present at least some background information to the community in advance of asking them questions. So the study was not complete until after all the data was collected. Public input is very important into the process, but it's one factor, and the safety benefit and the data has to be borne out by the study as well. So it seemed to me as though the public input, wasn't 100% consistent. There are different camps of public input, but
I think Mrs. Lieber froze, or is that just me?
No.
Okay. Let's see if she comes back. Mr. Kelly, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions. I still think the project as it was brought to us is still short-sighted. We have a chance to do this correctly, and I believe we need that third lane, the whole length of that section. That's where I stand on this.
So what I'm hearing is that we don't like the solution as a committee. Mr. Glassburn, go ahead. What do you have to say?
So, Mr. Chair, I appreciate your indulgence, but the point I was trying to get at in terms of asking the chronology is, what was the point of doing a study where we were going to come to a conclusion, then ask the public for their opinion? The public's opinion did not reinforce that solution, then ask this council what we wanted to do after a decision had already been made. That's why we're in this conundrum. It's not because of this council, it's not because of the residents, it's because we did this in the wrong order. So we asked the residents what they thought. We got a different response than what this project is. And quite honestly, my confidence in the consultant was undermined when they misrepresented that. So again, I know this is a pain and this is aggravating to all of us, but we got a different response. I've gotten consistently, anecdotally, from residents in this area, this is where I represent, a different response. So is Councilman Kelly. So it's not the residents' fault, it's not this council's fault that we put all of our eggs in a basket that didn't reflect the will of the council or the residents. So we can either do this the right way and vet those options fully, or we're just completely disregarding the role not only of the council, but of why we even bothered to ask the residents. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Mr. Glassburn. So my thought on this then is that we fleshed out what this recommendation and study said. We understand what the funding option is of this grant for safety related funding. And then we also understand what the cost implications essentially would be of going forward with a different proposal, which I haven't received any amendments to this proposal. Therefore, I feel like our committee has done a very effective job of understanding what this application entails, what those costs may be, how we're addressing from a timeline perspective what our funding would look like this year versus going forward next year in a more unknown funding solution. This is a application for we're basically proving to go forward with an application. That doesn't mean we're going to get it, or we're voting to not go for the application and revisit the application later and risk potentially having a less optimal funding option. Mrs. Lieber, are you back on? Because I know you were frozen. Did I capture that?
I am, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes. So did I capture that correctly of what's the position here?
Yeah. From what I heard, yeah.
Okay. So I feel like our committee's done a really effective job of identifying what this proposal from the administration is. And therefore, that's why I'm proposing that we move it out of committee and bring it to council for a vote and ask for a second. Okay. I make a recommendation to hold this in committee and ask for a second.
Second.
Okay. Motion passes 2-1. And at this time, I'll conclude the Streets and Transportation Committee meeting at 8:52. And I'm keeping council, due to time, we'll close this right now and we can address that in a future state. So thank you.